Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey there, and welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for continuing to choose this show. There are millions of podcasts out there, and you have a lot of ways that you could invest your time, but we designed this show to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, go and visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every week with Craig Brown. Now, Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, here we are again.
Yeah, here we are. And we're going to talk more about customers and what they expect. This should be an interesting discussion.
You know, Craig, I think all of our shows are interesting discussions. And as we're entering now well into the third year of this show, I think we've provided a lot of really interesting value. And today is going to be one of those shows that actually brings people some really good ideas that'll help them enhance their careers and grow them. So today we have Greg Kihlstrom. Now, he is the principal at the Agile World. And what he does is he hosts a podcast and he does consulting on customer experience, employee experience, and digital transformation. And you got to check out his podcast. He's been doing it for 3 years and 150 episodes, which, Craig, means he's been at it longer and has more episodes than we do at the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Only a few dozen. It's not that much further ahead.
No, and if it was a contest, Craig and I would find a way to catch up, but it's not a contest.
yeah, sooner or later, right.
So, Greg, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much. Looking forward to talking with you.
So, Greg, give us a little bit about your background and what you did before you founded the Agile World and then what the Agile World's all about.
Yeah, definitely. So I started my career working at a startup back in the early 2000s, so in the first internet boom. And I started really mixing creative, marketing, and technology. That really, my background really draws all of those three disciplines together. While I'm not a software engineer, I've always worked with, in and around the technology space. After leaving that startup, I started a marketing agency. I ran, and then eventually sold it about 4 years ago. And since then have gotten more and more into the experience space. So that's everything from customer experience, employee experience. And what I've found is in order to do those things well, it often takes a major transformation within an organization or in order to make it successful. So the last few years, I've written a few books, I've started the podcast, and I've been doing consulting with enterprise organizations to really help them understand how they can connect their customers better to their products and services. And quite often, as I said, that involves technology transformation.
Well, Greg, welcome to the show. The thing that caught my eye was this notion about experience. And our audience has got a lot of engineers that some of them are in very big companies, whether they're military companies or they're consumer companies. And they get a marketing department telling them, well, this is what the market expects, right? And because we're proud engineers, we often say, oh, nonsense, where's the data or where's the evidence and things like that. And so let's help the audience to understand first, when you say experience, and let's start with customer experience, what do you mean? What is it and how do you measure it? So let's go there, and then we'll talk about employee experience.
Yeah, so I think, and it's a great way to start, because I think we need a common vocabulary, and we often don't. So the way that I define customer experience is it is the customer's perception of their holistic experience with an organization. So that's not just their experience with a website. It's not just their experience driving a car or using a product or walking in a store. It is the sum of all of those experiences and their feelings and their perceptions about those. And so what that means is everyone within an organization has some touch point, to that experience. So a software engineer creating an application or creating a product needs to understand a customer just like a frontline employee in a retail store needs to understand and empathize with that customer. So, the example that you gave, I often hear that in organizations where, one department is telling another, well, you need to understand this better. Well, it's really everyone's job to understand and to, with that common understanding, implement it in the way, according to their job and their role. And so, measuring it, there's a lot of different ways, and I'm happy to get a lot deeper into that as well. There's a lot of different ways to do that, whether it's, I think we've all seen these surveys that pop up at the end of when we check out online, the how likely are you to recommend? That feeds into what's called Net Promoter Score. There's lots of other real-time insights that you're able to get as well. But really, because as I was saying, it's this holistic view of the experience. It's very challenging to pick one number and say, okay, well, that is someone's whole perception of this brand. It takes tying a lot of different pieces together usually to really make a measurement.
Yeah, and so I'm biased because I didn't get trained in mechanical engineering. I'm an aerospace engineer, as the listeners know, but I ended up in the car business because we were doing more and more embedded software in cars, so flight controls, if you will. And the same thing came up. We solved a lot of the customer problems, the complaints about shift quality or the fuel economy objectives or whatever. We fine-tuned that in software. And then eventually software became a predominant thing, even a value-based thing. And some of those values, in other words, somebody's willing to pay for a feature, they came from customers that said, hey, I wish you would do this. So I get that kind of a measure. Now there's two things in my mind and they're not in the same direction. So let me ask you first about, you talk about there's a relationship between customer experience and employee experience, and it would seem to me that would help this whole understanding of experience. What's employee experience?
Yeah, so if you think about the definition of customer experience being, someone's perception of all their experiences with the brand from the outside, employee experience is really the inverse of that. So it is their experience as an employee from the very beginning, from being recruited and onboarded and all the way through, even through leaving the company and potentially being an alumni of that organization. So think about how I think a lot of people have good and bad stories of onboarding where either it was a really hands-on and everybody made you feel welcome, or they kind of just threw you in and left to your own devices and sink or swim. And so that has a the first 90 days that someone is at an organization has a huge impact on how engaged and what their experience is at the company. And so if you take that, when you have an unengaged employee and you expect them to care and empathize with a customer, if they don't care about their job, how good are they going to serve the customer?
Right. And especially in large companies, that gets even worse because you might view or you might be told your customer is the next guy down the line in your company, right? And we used to always make a joke about, oh, no, customers have money. The next guy down the line is a partner, right? not a customer. But the point is, you're right. Customers will feel underserved if the employees are for whatever reasons, distracted or not focused or whatever, and companies fail ultimately for that. So, all right. So the other thing that was on my mind at the same time, so experience is important, measuring it's important. Does a market get defined by customer experience, or does it get defined by an innovation? And I think I'm asking this because a lot of engineers would say, well, we brought a Model T to market. Everybody bought it because it was a whole lot better than a horse and buggy. But if you'd have asked people driving horse and buggies 100 and whatever years ago, they would have said, oh yeah, just make the horse and buggy better. Right. So which defines it? Customer experience or invention?
Well,
what defines a market?
I think that innovation and technology are always important, but I do think that there's been a shift in how consumers spend their money and invest their time and just all their resources, which is time and money being resources. And we've seen this a lot with the shift as millennials have entered the workplace and now are, they're getting more senior positions, have more money to spend. this focus on experience lifestyle. So less people buying houses and and investing in longer term things, more spent on vacations and going out to eat at nice restaurants and things like that. Now, as everyone ages, they tend to get a little more pragmatic. So, we're seeing even there, and even with millennials, but there is a big shift on focusing a bit, and for better or worse. I'm not going to comment on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we are seeing a big shift on short-term spending and this whole idea of experience. And there's some statistic floating out there. I wish I knew the exact number, but something like 90% of brands now really consider customer experience to be their main competitive differentiator, not technology, not features, all of that, but experience.
So, okay. So now I'm following better. Though I'm tempted to ask, how's that changed in the last 18 months? I mean, let's jump to the pandemic thing and then we'll jump back. I mean, there's a lot of experiences we were forced to give up, right? For health safety reasons. We're fortunate here in the United States, things are recovering pretty nicely. But will people keep spending on experience, or do you think they've been thinking about maybe things should change? And how would the market researcher like yourself or the product innovator, how do we get on top of that so we can take advantage of it?
Yeah, and so it's not always about an amazing once in a lifetime experience like that. So there's brands like Ritz-Carlton and those luxury brands out there that's their promise is these great experiences like that. But also think about something mundane like car insurance, right? So my experience having submitting a claim, getting paid, and getting my car fixed and all of that means, I'm a longtime customer of one particular insurance company because they just make my life easy. It's not about it's not necessarily good. Like a car accident is never good, or getting your car broken into or whatever is never good. But when it's happened, they've made my life incredibly easy and took care of everything for me. I have no reason to switch. If I had a bad experience, I've switched plenty of services before because it was a pain and the customer service person didn't really understand my problem or didn't care to understand my problem. And so I think it's about whether it's a something I want to remember the rest of my life or something I just want to get past and get through. It's like how did they understand what I needed in that moment and made it as good as possible.
Well, and it's interesting you bring up during this past 18 months the changing experiences. To your point, car insurance is a really good example. A lot of us drove a lot less. Well, then you would expect the really good company to reach out to you and say, well, you used to drive 10,000 miles a year. You only drove 1,000 this year. Congratulations. Here's your rebate. Right. Without even asking, right? Just do it. Right. So those of you that didn't get that rebate, you can start bugging your car insurance company.
I know that's a good one. I'm going to make a call after this.
Yeah. See what it is. Yeah. It wasn't that much, just so you know. But they did reach out to me. I didn't do anything. They just called me and said, hey, you guys aren't driving. I said, yeah, for obvious reasons. Anyways. Okay. So you name your consulting company now, the Agile World. And I work with another little group of people that do process modeling, and they talk about the importance of agility, meaning adjusting your process for the specific situation, whether that be a new service or be a new product or whatever. So explain to us why agility and experience go so well together. You've talked about it on your website. I wouldn't have expected that. I get that we got to pay attention to experience, but agility is a whole different thing. And you've called your company the Agile World. Fill in the gaps for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so, it all kind of started, I wrote a book called The Agile Brand back in 2018. And, really looking at this idea of customer experience as being something where, I look at perfection is not a static thing, right? It's a singular point in time. And, if you look back at several years and you see something that was great 10 years ago, it doesn't always age. Sometimes it does age well, sometimes it doesn't. And so I always look at this as customer experience, whatever you want to call it, like customer experience, employee experience. It is a series of moments in time. And so you've got to make sure that you're being nimble and able to adapt where technology is changing. From the employee experience, think about everything that's going on right now with remote employees and hybrid work and companies trying to figure out what to do with their employees. A lot of people pushing back. Customers are going through the same thing. They don't necessarily want things the way they used to be. They want to get back to some kind of sense of normal. And so, pandemic aside, even there's always continual change. And therefore, from the customer standpoint, so companies need to be able to continually adapt and adjust. And so you can't just say, you know what, we're going to do this for the next 12 months and then take a look back and see how it worked. There needs to be continual monitoring, adjustment, and measurement throughout to see, who could have predicted the pandemic, in last February or January. And now, if they weren't nimble enough, they would have been, the companies that weren't nimble enough, I guess to say it another way, really suffered.
Well, yeah, the car companies, which of course I still pay attention to, everybody got panicked by the immediate effect was, oh, gee whiz, we're not going to survive. Let's not buy any parts. I'm speaking in layman's terms, right? Yeah. And then it was not just 60 days later, they said, holy crap, there's still a people buying cars, partly because they're moving up to the countryside and partly because they're not sure how long this is going to last. They're buckling down, right? So they had a surge in sales, and the agile car companies, to your point about being flexible, are the ones that manage supply chain disruption, which everybody can read about in the newspapers, pretty well. Others didn't manage it so well, right? And some really popular vehicles, which here in the United States is always pickup trucks, some of them weren't built for almost 3 months as a result of a lack of agility, if you will. Now, this problem isn't fixed yet. It's IC manufacturers. The other thing that happened is all of a sudden, all of us were buying new electronics for home, right? Because we were staying home. And those same chips, or a lot of the same chips, are picking up IC foundry space. So, being agile is important. And I think coming back to what we started with, it's all about measuring. But what do you measure, and what tools do you use to help with that? Is it just surveys, or are there other ways you can get on top of this? In other words, to see that a change is coming and then be ahead of it before your competition gets there. Yeah,
so I look at measurement in 4 categories, and I won't take too much time to explain. Okay. It's at a high level.
We are engineers. We love details.
So there's the qualitative, which is the surveys, which you mentioned. So that's how likely are you to recommend or get feedback like that. There's the quantitative things where we can measure, does someone buy and buy again and refer others. So we can measure if someone buys again, they were obviously happy for some reason, with their experience. And then there's 2 other measurements which are more internal. There's product measurement, and then there's process measurement. So product measurement would be something like, man, it is taking everyone like 20 minutes to check out from our online shopping cart. It should really only take 5. What in the world is going, everybody must be confused. They're getting through the process, but they're confused about it, or something's not going wrong. So something's not going right. So there's something with our product that is not working as well as it should. And then process is what happens when there is a problem. Like, how quickly are we able to resolve problems internally and make adjustments or things like that. So, it's really, if you look at all 4 of those, every organization is going to have a slightly different way of assign different metrics to each of those. But it really is holistic like that. And a lot of organizations are not looking at it that way.
And if you're a capital-intensive business like a car company or other consumer products, you for sure are trying to streamline manufacturing. And a lot of our tools in the Digital Enterprise Society, all the different vendors from Siemens to Dassault to all the rest, they have excelled at simulations so that we can predict how we can mass produce. Yeah. The tools are pretty weak when it comes to this question of those 4 categories you mentioned. Well, surveys are pretty straightforward, but the ability to do root cause analysis to figure out, why is our manufacturing process or our sales process failing, or is it slower than we expect, or we think it's great, but every consumer complains about it? Those measures could be done more reliably. And if you're a startup guy listening to this, I like your 4 categories, Greg. I think people should just spend a little bit of time think about that, right? It's not just the surveys, but it's also, did we do it efficiently? Was the customer happy when we were done? And, oh, by the way, is there repeat sales? I mean, repeat visits, sales, experiences, that's one of your clear indicators you're doing something right. And make sure you don't mess that up, right? Lead us into the future a bit. I mean, you've had the blessings of understanding what you're doing, and now you're writing books about it, which is great. Where do you think the future of work's going to go, and how much of it's going to be technology driven versus people knowing what to do driven, which is, I guess, related to technology. But a lot of times people just talk about tools and don't think about people or processes. And I'm curious, how do you think the future of work's going to change for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's a lot of people that are kind of spelling doom and gloom with, the machines are going to replace us. And I mean, in the auto industry, I think you've probably been hearing that it's true in certain places. And by the way, the machines do better because it's the same thing over and over and over and over. Well, right. And I think that's where I'm an optimist when it comes to technology, but I'm also a realist in the sense that machines are going to replace some of what we do. And to your point just now, that's actually not a bad thing. Machines are actually way better at so many things that humans end up stuck doing. Humans are actually a lot better at doing other things that machines are terrible at. And so I think, what I believe is, work is going to become, humans are going to be elevated to a more creative. And when I say creative, it's not just design and painting and stuff like that, but more creative, whether it's strategy or just operationally even. Humans are going to be elevated to more of those types of positions, automation, whether that's, robotics or software or some combination thereof, are going to continue to replace portions of people's jobs. But the other thing that I see in the future of work, I mean, definitely, I don't think we're coming back completely from remote work. I think a lot of companies are staying, at least partially remote. So there's that component. There's also a component and a growing component of independent workers that are, there's some jobs where they just need full-time employees, and that will always be the case. But there's a growing amount of contractors and independent contractors and freelancers that is, that's pretty rapidly growing worldwide. And so, I think you have all of those things together. It actually gives the humans a little more autonomy in the world of work, and takes a little bit potentially the power away from the companies and the employers. But I think at the end of the day, everybody can win. I believe that there is a win-win in there.
Yeah, I've been pleasantly surprised. I used to be one of those managers. I was fine with people working wherever they worked best. And, we got together once a week if necessary. And this was heard of in a big car company. But now I talked with a couple of them recently who are still working at the company, and they're like, oh yeah, we're not sure now if we'll ever go back into the office full time. We're beginning to think more and more we'll just work remotely, and maybe it's once or twice a week, whatever is needed. And even with Zoom and all the rest of that, we're using Zoom for this recording. It's really quite easy. There's still some human interaction time, and creativity at a whiteboard is still really important. At least problem solving, it's really important. So I imagine some things will still get back together. But yeah, the future of work, the people, creativity. You hit the nail on the head. Computers are not very good at creating a new idea. You can read all kinds of science fiction, and some of it's very entertaining. But at the end of the day, they always fall apart when the rules conflict, and the rules come from the humans. We humans, we can traverse rules or even jump over them at times, whether the rules of physics or even rules of the way you run your place, and you find a new way of working or a new thing you didn't realize before. And I think people should be agile. I firmly believe in it, and I believe that the people that want to measure processes, they have to be agile right along with us. You need to measure the value of the company, not the not did you do the step the way I told you to do the step, right? Which is kind of it's old fashioned. It's the way we used to work decades ago. Yeah. So how's COVID affected you? Have you? I mean, you're weathering a storm. You got time to write a book, apparently. So congratulations on that. What else is happening that surprised you about COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I was already working from home, actually, just so that whole part didn't really affect me too much. I mean, I think there was immediate stoppage in some area. I had a few hospitality clients that needed to completely pivot. I worked with a restaurant who immediately overnight switched to delivery and takeout and stuff like that. So, I had to,
which is a really different experience.
Yeah, that's a total. And this was a high-end restaurant. It was just or at least one of their places was a high-end. So just completely overnight, changed their world and not for the better. But they were able to recover, and now things are getting back to normal. But even those less directly affected. It's been it's been an interesting time, and just working with organizations to kind of get back to, do we really need to go back to exactly the way it was, or to your point, can we keep people remotely? And a lot of them are coming to the similar conclusions. Is there are some things people are actually more productive doing some kinds of work remotely, and then for the creativity, or even just the camaraderie, bring them back together for some of that. But people sometimes actually do work better in their own kind of zone.
Yeah. Well, Greg, this has been a fascinating conversation. Leave us, and then I'll hand it back to Thom. What's the biggest surprise the last 18 months from your vantage point?
Yeah,
positive or negative, I don't care.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess from a business standpoint, I'm surprised that more companies were not adversely affected by, despite the economic downturn in general. I'm actually surprised there weren't broader repercussions. I mean, again, the hospitality and some healthcare and some focused examples, definitely. But I really think, and that's probably for a number of different reasons, but I'm surprised that things actually stayed as level as they were from a business standpoint, despite everything else, the chaos and just terrible personal things that were going on.
Yeah, well said. Thom, back to you.
Yeah. So, Greg, before I let you go, we talked a little bit about, the customer experience and how so many companies are now saying that's the most important thing. And of course, we talk a lot on this show about digital transformation. One area I'd like to just dive a little deeper into before we let you go is the idea of the employee experience. Because I think there's several people listening to this episode who are like, I think my boss needs to hire Greg to talk about the employee experience. So
I'm sure he's willing to be hired, aren't you, Greg?
Hey, yeah.
So what can companies do to improve that employee experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first thing, it starts with understanding the whole journey of an employee. I mean, just like, if you're in customer experience or marketing or even in technology, you map from start to finish how a customer is using your product or service and how they become a customer, all of that. Really understanding and empathizing with employees of what is it actually like your first 90 days at an organization, or what is it like after you've been there for a couple of years and your employees don't feel like there's anywhere else for them to go. Like there's not training opportunities, there's not upward trajectory, so to speak. Just kind of understanding those, where are some of the pain points in your organization. And then I would say a big piece of it is leadership, and leadership by example. And, great organizations are led from the top, and, they know how to hire good employees, and that always helps. But leaders, they practice what they preach. They're consistent. They train other people to be leaders. And I think that's really, it's lacking. And I will say this is where one of those things that, remote work has been a challenge to a lot of people is the change in communication styles. It's not that it's impossible, but communicating with an employee that you used to sit next to or down the hall from versus getting on Zoom with them, a few times a week, it's a different experience, and you've got to you've got to adapt to that, and you've got to understand that maybe that employee actually loves working from home, likes working for the company, but loves working from home. How do you make that a consistent, how do you make your mentorship of them and your leadership consistent despite, them being wherever they may choose to be?
So a little follow-on question to that is, if somebody's not happy with their current experience and they're looking for a job, how can they identify a company who's going to put into practice the things that you teach around, a good employee experience?
Well, fortunately we have, there's things like Glassdoor and other places like that, which are increasingly being used. I mean, in a negative way, there's a lot of negative reviews and, for sure. But, there are places like that you can look and just kind of see what's it like to work there. And, watch what some of the statements are being put out by these companies of late of, how are they treating their employees? Is it, my way or the highway, everybody back in the office or else you're fired? Is it a more empathetic environment? Some industries, like, it makes sense for people to be in, but others, I will say it kind of feels like it's a power trip, of making everyone do something, whether it's actually in the best interest of the employees involved. And so, get a sense of what kind of decisions leadership is making, and why, and is it in the best interest of employees and the work getting done, or is it simply just, well, I think we should do it this way, and who cares? And I've seen a lot of both, for what it's worth.
So, Greg Kihlstrom, thank you so much for being here on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. If somebody wanted to find you or find your podcast, how do they do that?
Yeah, you can find my podcast at the Agile.world. It's or it's on Apple and Spotify and all those other channels as well. If you want to connect with me, I'm very active on LinkedIn. Just search for Greg Kihlstrom and would love to connect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for being here. Greg, always great to spend some time with you. And everyone who listened, I say it every single time, we want you to come back every week, because we're going to have more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out right now at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.